Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming. I'm Steve Putnam, one of the members of the Lake Committee, and I head up our Pond Watch program, which is a sampling program that we do through Leake County. Today, here in the meeting, we have Casey, our general manager, Kathy Conway, needs no introduction, Scott, Ernesto de la Vega with Lee County Hyacinth Control District and the director of Lee County's Pond Watch program. And down on this end right now we have Daryl Brahman and Pete Karowski. They're part of the Pond Watch team with me. And so what we wanted to do today was present the Pond Watch findings over the last 17 months, I believe, or 16 months worth of data on the spreadsheets. And specifically today, we're going to talk about two all-lake samplings that we did. One back at the end of April, right at the start of May in 2019. And we just completed a second all-lakes sampling program on Labor Day of this year. And we do that so that we sort of identify which lakes we'll want to continue to sample going into 2021. But it also gives us a really nice snapshot as to the water quality overall throughout the community here in Sandoval. So the first sheet we're going to be looking at is one called the All Lakes Sampling Results with the dates 4/30/2019 and 9/7/2020. And when you look at the spreadsheet, the numbers are kind of all run together. One of the things that you'll find in the slides that we're putting up on the presentation will be a table of explanations that'll help you understand what the numbers mean and whether they're good or not good. And Victor will have that up as slide number, well, it doesn't have a reference number, but it's going to be up on the website. So as we look at this overall review, Ernesto, tell me what your assessment has been as you look through our two all-lake samplings for the last 18 months.
So you see a lot of nutrients, a lot of parameters in this table, which is quite complicated, but I'm going to narrow down to three that are the most significant in order to tell us what is the status of the pond. The three are going to be total phosphorus that you see, the total nitrogen, and the chlorophyll A. Chlorophyll A is the pigments inside the algae, and we extract the algae, we determine the concentration of that chlorophyll, and then tells us how much algae is present. And that is an effect of the presence of phosphorus and nitrogen. When you have those two nutrients, it will stimulate the presence of this algae in the form of chlorophyll A. So those are the three main factors that we're going to be looking. The total phosphorus, if you look at the table, and you probably can see that table, all the red color numbers are what they're meaning is that they're red because they're outside of the range. And that outside range these are values that we have done analysis of stormwater ponds in Southwest Florida, and we found the average is pretty much below 0.1 milligrams per liter. If you go above that, you will have a red marking there because you're exceeding the normal average concentration of total phosphorus. Now, when you go to the nitrogen, and you will see similar kind of a highlights on red, but the numbers are different there because now we're looking at the numbers above 2 milligrams per liter. Those are numbers for nitrogen that are exceeding the average value for a stormwater pond in Southwest Florida. And the chlorophyll, the limit is 40. 40 is the micrograms per liter of chlorophyll A. So those are the values. We have 0.1, we have 2 for nitrogen, and we have 40 for chlorophyll. So those are the parameters that we're looking as far as concentration. Now, if you look at the values for all your ponds, and if we can see there's a lot of phosphorus that is extremely high for 2019. It goes to 2020. Some of them remain high. Now you go to the nitrogen in 2019, where some of them were in the range, was fine, but then it goes to nitrogen, and then 2020, well, some of them actually, I don't know why they're in red there, but we can take a look on the graphic that I have. So if we can look at that graphics, it will explain a little bit this transition between 1 year compared to this year on the nitrogen. But that's just to overall take a look. And if we can go to the next.
Yeah,
slide.
the only other thing I would want to point out on the overall spreadsheet is if the numbers are shown in red, if they're in black, that's within the normal ranges we're looking for. If it's in red, it's out of range. And there are even some lakes and some values that are highlighted in blue, and those are exceptionally out of range, whether it be high or low. They're way out of range, and those are the biggest problem areas. The only other interesting thing here is, on a whim, over a year ago, I decided to throw Ernesto a curveball, and I sampled the Cape Coral reclaimed water and sent it in to him as Lake 27.
Correct.
And 2 days later, I get this frantic call saying something's all wrong. Lake 27 is all screwed up. We're going to have to go back and resample it because every value is completely off the chart. And then I laughed and told him what I'd done. So we started tracking that. And the one takeaway anybody who looks at this chart will notice is that every value for each month and for each of the 2 all-lake samplings through the year, every value but one is in blue, meaning that water that we're watering our yards with is essentially liquid fertilizer. It is full of nitrogen and phosphorus.
Correct.
And nitrates and other things. The only thing that's normal, for the most part, is ammonia. So we will talk about that maybe in a little bit, but right now we'll continue to talk through. The next thing will be slide number 2, and that'll be our total phosphorus bar
Correct.
graph.
Correct. Great. In this bar that you can see, there is a line, and the line, red line, means that that's the upper limit for phosphorus. And you see a lot of those bar graphs, the blue color is for the 2019, and then the orange one is for 2020. So you see some of them, the bar has gone up in 2020. Some of them have remained the same. Some of them has actually going down. But everything that is exceeding above that line, those are the ones that we're paying attention, because that is not right to keep those numbers so high all the time. There will be implications as far as algae presence and as far as all the other implications there. So that's phosphorus, and we can point out some of the ones who are really concerned about number 9, pond number 9. Number 15 has going from the normal level to a high level. Number 20, pond number 20, has done the same thing, has gone skyrocket above their level. Number 24 has done the same. So we're looking at those ponds that has been increasing. Now, some other ponds we're keeping as a regular sampling because they're still on the same above the level. That was for phosphorus.
Okay, so one of the things I want to point out is for the last 16 months, we have been sampling 5 lakes and the Cape Coral reclaimed water, 6 samples every month for Pond Watch. Now that we've done our second all-lake sampling, we reevaluated, and we're going to be changing, not all, but most of the lakes we're sampling. We're going to be sampling 4 of the 5 will be new for 2021. And we garnered that by compiling the lakes with the biggest problems overall, and we'll be looking at that going forward.
Great, thank you. In fact, now the next slide, which is slide number
3.
Number 3 in the package that you see
So
there.
total nitrogen?
Total nitrogen, correct. And then the level, again, the maximum level that we see is number 2. So again, the numbers for 2019 is in blue, 2020 is in orange. So you see some of them has increased, but rarely, none of them has exceeded to the high level, which is kind of good because we're still, although you see some few highlighters there, some few high ones, Not so much passing except for the number 6 there. Oh, I had to admit something else. For the sake of the science behind this, this is one day on a year that we took a sample for both. So this doesn't represent everything. This might be the only day that we happen to have an algae problem or a nitrogen problem. So, but this is just the only thing that we can have as a snapshot, and it's called a snapshot of the whole community. And we wanted to see that, so we have a whole comparison. Besides, that's a lot of work.
The reason we do this snapshot is because I think there are about 100 communities in Lee County that are providing samples to Ernesto and the Lee County Water Quality Lab. So we all do it in an hour here in Sandoval and take them out to the lab. He spends an entire month running the analysis on the water quality for 100 different communities around Lee County. So, and then lastly, we'll talk about chlorophyll A. That'll be slide 4, I think. Yep.
Correct. In fact, let me point out something that, okay, so the nitrogen was not that extremely high. Phosphorus was. Now, before I go into the chlorophyll, let me explain something about it. Chlorophyll is algae, and the algae will grow when you have a ratio of 10 to 1. When that ratio has been respected, that algae will grow because 10 nitrogen units versus 1 nitrogen unit for phosphorus. Now, if you exceed 1 and it's too high, the other one will be the limiting factor. So when you look at the nitrogen being not so high, you have a huge amount of phosphorus that we were mentioning earlier. So you have plenty of phosphorus. You just need a little bit of nitrogen to complement the potential for the algae to grow, to reach that 10 to 1. And then when you get that 10 to 1, that's when you have algae problems. Okay, now let's go into the algae slide, which is number 4. Okay, so again, the line is 40 micrograms per liter. And that 40, above that will be a turbid pond with a lot of microscopic algae suspended in the water. And you see that it was very critical in some. There were high values in the 2019 and has gone down for 2020 in several. But the reason why it was high like that is because now they have nutrients and they might be respecting that 10 to 1 ratio that I was mentioning. So you need a little bit of that nitrogen to stimulate that algae because you have plenty of phosphorus in some of those problematic lakes. So now you see where the irrigation, the fertilization comes place, even the internal nitrogen bringing by the muck of some of these lakes. The lakes are very old. The ones who were first in the initial stage of development of this area, they might have accumulated detritus and muck in the bottom, and they might be the source of nitrogen. I don't know that yet, but we can do an analysis from the bottom water compared to the surface water. These are all kind of things that we can plan on in the future. But that, again, that nitrogen-phosphorus ratio will be the effect on the algae that we see as a chlorophyll A.
So if you look at those 3 charts in total here, just to get a sense for where we are, our big problem, and it's clearly visible when you look at all 3 of those bar graphs together, is our biggest issue here is phosphorus in huge quantities, way above the bar in many cases. And it wasn't nearly as consistent from 2019 to 2020. Some that got better, some got worse. We haven't really been able to establish a pattern. And keep in mind, these are, as Ernesto said, these are spot samples, one time each month. If you could sample yourself to death by getting into this multiple samples in a week or in a day or whatever. So we're just taking the best we can do with sampling to get a picture. But right now, there's no question about phosphorus is our biggest nutrient problem here. And when you factor that into the ratio of nitrogen and phosphorus that creates algae, It takes very little additional nitrogen because we have so much phosphorus. When you look at the nitrogen overall over the 2 years, 2020 is much better than it was in 2019. That's pretty clear. Is that because of the aeration exactly? I can't really tell you that. I don't know that. We'll have to have people that are a lot smarter than me to do that analysis, but it's at least promising because the levels of nitrogen have gone down. And then lastly, chlorophyll, we're for the most part below the threshold of a problem. The biggest problems were in 2019. For the most part, both 19 and 20 were below the threshold, and we had a few problem lakes that the board has known about. Residents have seen. We've had a few fish kills and algae growth that we've tried to attack and manage. But overall, you know, I think from my point of view, and Daryl or Pete or anybody can weigh in, but to my point of view, I believe our lakes are better shaped today than they were 12 or 14 months ago. And I credit a couple of things for that. Certainly the aerators have had a big benefit. We had a specific assessment done on one lake that we were having algae problems with earlier in the summer. And one of the most impressive things that came out of that was they did a measure of the water temperatures down through the lake as it went, if I can find the right page now. And this is, Victor, I'm sorry, this is going to be slide number 5. And there's a lot of information there. And again, this was a one-time sample. But as you look down through the depth of the lake from the top down through 12 feet, both the amount of dissolved oxygen and the temperature were pretty consistent top to bottom, which is very important. We were having lakes where the bottom of our lakes are fairly consistent, so we aren't getting flips, we aren't getting oxygen spikes that could cause problems in a fish kill.
I would like to add to that. I 100% agree with what you just said. Is that the fact that we are able to mix the pond so well, that is an excellent approach to this possibility of an anaerobic condition in the bottom of the pond. What I was describing earlier about the pond being a huge amount of muck, that might be a possibility that now having an aerator mixing the pond, providing oxygen to that muck, then you have bacteria, aerobic bacteria, who's able to break this muck and reducing that muck. Slowly but surely, eventually, those bacteria will work on the process of degrading and breaking down that muck. So it's a positive thing to have. You have extended the life of the pond by having these aerators. So I am 100%. And that might be one of the responses. Why are we having some good systems in place right now?
Absolutely.
And I think,
go ahead, Scott.
I just wanted to, for the residents that are watching, I just want them to understand that this appears to be a positive cause, or an effect, I should say, is we're agreeing with the money that was spent for the aeration, that we're getting that mixing through that water column and not the stratification that we were. So we are seeing numbers changing in the positive, and we always told the residents, listen, we're not going to see an overnight change in the quality and the blooms of algae. And our lakes vendor just walked in. I'm sure they're going to chime in on that. And there are other things that we're doing. But I think for the bang for the buck, if you will, that we spent on the aeration, I think right now it's paying dividends. And as we continue water quality testing and some other things that Solitude is doing, I think we're going to see that consistent improvement throughout our lakes and through testing.
That's correct.
So the other piece, from my point of view, that has really helped us is with our relationship with Solitude Lake Management, and the person who manages that for us was able to just join us now. Her name is Christine Kennedy. She does a fantastic job for us in terms of helping us monitor what's going on in our lakes and helping us understand some of the things that we're seeing or solutions that we can look to. And one of the things that Christine has been doing with us is, in the past, we had some pretty indiscriminate use of chemicals and a lot of heavy spraying in our lakes. We were trying to control midges and algae and all kinds of things, and our littorals were in terrible shape. And I would say 2 or 2.5 years ago, we made a conscious decision to really focus on eliminating as much of the spraying as we can in terms of chemicals and trying to use the natural tools we have to help control the chemicals going into the lake or the nutrients. And so we really focused on improving the littorals. We cut way back on the amount of spraying that was done specifically into the littorals, and they have rebounded. And I think anybody who watches their lakes knows that now the littorals out around the edges of your pond are in better shape than they've been in the 7 years I've lived here. So Christina is a big part of that. One of the things, most important documents, Victor, is going to be slide number 6, which is a report that Christina creates every month by visiting every pond, all 25 of them in Sandoval, and she provides a report for us that talks about what she found. There are pictures of every lake to back up what's going on. It's probably overall of our lakes today versus the last year and a half.
Yeah, absolutely. So the lakes sort of went through a shift. One of the biggest things I noticed was that we used to have more filamentous algae growth. And now we've kind of after this that we put in the aeration, we sort of saw a shift more towards a planktonic growth. We still see some filamentous growth, but we're seeing more of the more shift into the planktonic blooms. And it's not in every pond either. It seems to be like the same 5 or 6 lakes that continuously have these blooms. And we think part of that was due to the aeration kind of stirring up all that stratified bottom water. And so I think over time that's going to continue to improve and as the lakes mix and sort of balance out. So that was one of the biggest things that I noticed was sort of a shift in the algae assemblage away from more filamentous to more planktonic algae. But when I do see filamentous, it's more of a green variety and less of a blue-green variety, which is much more desirable for a lake ecosystem and much more easily managed, and it also is not a toxin producer. So as far as algae growth goes, that's sort of the biggest changes I've seen. And then with the shoreline in particular, we definitely saw thicker, happier, healthier littorals. We opted for a much more selective application program because we wanted to fill in sort of all those little gaps around the shoreline to help buffer for runoff, help with erosion, provide habitat for birds and fish and turtles, just trying to improve the habitat and improve the shoreline. Also, when you have really nice littorals around the edges, you typically have less algae growth along the edges because it sort of shades the shoreline and it competes directly with the algae for space and nutrients. So, the littorals, they don't necessarily have 0 weeds in them. They do have a little bit of weed growth because, if we want to maintain a full, healthy littoral, then we're not necessarily going to be able to get every blade of torpedo grass or every strand of alligator weed out of there. There's going to be a little mixed in constantly, but we'll do our best to mitigate that growth and also manage for a healthy littoral shelf. So I think we've done a pretty good job all around.
I would like to add to that because it's absolutely true what you're saying. The littorals are actually quite quite complex because they don't have just one tiny plants. There's a whole nature in that habitat. You're talking filamentous algae, you're talking other species there. But the one thing that the littorals, some people might see the littorals standing there, and you don't pay attention so much, but there are filamentous algae, and those filamentous algae, that scum that people call, is what is really removing the nutrients of the whole water system. So having the wind going and then hitting the waters, hitting that littoral and the filamentous algae, that's where the filtration is happening. Not the plants. The plants are standing. They're not absorbing nutrients from they're anchoring in the mud. It's the filamentous algae. But you don't see the filamentous algae because there's so much flowers and leaf. That's where the hidden thing on the littorals. So having other species of exotics there, it happens. The birds love it, fish love it, even other dragonflies, which will help controlling some other type of creatures like mosquitoes and midgets and things like that. They're all benefiting from having the littorals there.
And I think that's a great point. I just want the residents to know, though, that there is algae that is a beneficial algae. So to look at that, and I know the media takes this turn on algae that it's all bad, it's all toxic, but there is algae that has benefit to it, as you guys just alluded to. So we are not going to eradicate every type of algae in our lakes and cause a sterile body of water. So we do want some sort of algae present, and I think you guys just articulated that to the residents. So they just need to know also you will see algae because there is beneficial algae.
Correct.
Algae's the bottom of the food chain. So if you want to have a healthy overall food web and ecosystem, you need to have a little bit of the algae for the little planktivorous fish to eat, and then the predatory fish eat them, and then the birds eat the predatory fish. So it sort of builds up from that one little green bit of stuff.
So one other thing I wanted to acknowledge, because he's here with us today, every week Solitude has a technician on site. His name is Garrett, and he was out today working, as he does every week, trying to address specific areas where we've identified an issue that we'd like to try and work on. And so when you see a gator crawling around the pond on a precipitous angle and you're sure he's going to roll at any minute, that'll be our friend Garrett. The one thing I have to say about Garrett that has separated him from anybody I know is that I've never seen him ignore or run over a resident. If somebody comes out to talk to him, he will stop and tell you exactly what he's doing and why. He's an extremely polite and knowledgeable fella, and I want to thank you, Garrett, for the work you do here.
I appreciate that.
And the residents are appreciative that you haven't run anybody over.
No, and I mean, if people have questions, anything like that, I'm always happy to stop. I mean, and kind of explain what I'm doing, what I'm targeting, and it's cool when you get the homeowners to come out and they go, oh, okay, that makes sense. I understand why you're doing what you're doing and everything. So,
We're not trying to hide anything.
no.
We're transparent, open books. You have a question, we're more than willing to answer it.
And to that theme, the board, and Scott has led this charge since the day I met him, he is all about, and the board overall is all about transparency so we can explain to you what's going on and why. I never know what's going on or why, but I can call Christine and she can make me sound like a genius when I get back to you. So we invite your questions. If you have a question, get a hold of Casey, send the Lakes group an email through the website. We will try and answer your question. If we don't know the answer, we'll find somebody who does and get back with you. So, and lastly, I should say, when Garrett is doing, and this isn't on the slides, Vic, but every week we get a report that Garrett fills out on exactly what he did, exactly where he did it. So we know what lakes were treated, what they were treated for, and why. He makes notes of specific wildlife or nuisance issues that he sees. And we get a report every week that Casey gets and I get, and I don't know who else gets it, Christina for sure. So we always know what's going on around the community in terms of lakes, which is a huge turnaround from when I first started on the Lakes Committee. I mean, Solitude has been a great partner for us in that regard.
I would like to address the reclaimed water.
Oh, okay. Why don't you talk first?
I have one issue that I would like to bring, since we are doing water quality monitoring, and you have sent me that sample that was the loaded sample from the reclaimed water. The reclaimed water is wastewater that has been treated by the city of Cape Coral, has a wastewater treatment plant, and they sell you, or they give it, I don't know, they charge you. This one. So they sell you that water saying that this is water for irrigation because it has nutrients already, so you don't have to fertilize. There is some truth about that, but there is also some problems, which I want to address now. In the summer, the soil is already saturated with water because the rain is constantly there. So you already have a layer underground of water from the natural rain event. So you have the irrigation now coming because you have the sprinklers at a certain time always. Whether it rain or not, they don't know. So the water that is coming with the nutrients loaded, it will go on top of the other water, and it will go right into everything on the ground. But it will run into the pond. Then you have this excess nutrient that you don't know where it came from the irrigation water. And we had that evidence, because I've seen it many times. The water irrigation in the summer might not be necessary. Extensive amount of water coming all the time is loaded with nutrients. That's a bad one. So I just want to warn about the irrigation practices.
So Allison with our landscape committee and I have actually talked about potentially setting aside a test neighborhood where we would maybe cut back or stop fertilizing for a year and see how that neighborhood stacks up in terms of lawn care against our regular fertilizing pattern, because of the fact that we're using this very high nutrient reclaimed water for irrigation. I would maintain that we don't need to fertilize our yards because we're doing it every week when we water. So that's one thing we're going to maybe be able to test. A second thing that I would like the residents to know is to please maintain your sprinkler systems. Go out once a month or every 2 months, turn them on for a minute and let them run so you can see where your sprinklers have been grown over by grass and aren't watering like you need them to, or where they're shooting way farther than they need. We constantly, when we're out testing and doing water samples, we constantly see sprinklers running way over the allotted times they're supposed to, or shooting directly into the lake. And you might as well just be pouring fertilizer right into the lake when that happens. If you have a system that's not sprinkling the way it should be or running directly into the lakes, you can call either Down to Earth or Crawford and let them know, and they'll fix that. Or if it's your own house and you maintain it, please readjust those sprinkler heads to keep that water out of the lake. And we're just coming out of the rainy season, and nobody should have been watering twice a day, even in this year when it wasn't super wet, twice a week, I mean, for their sprinklers. It's just way more water than the lawns require.
And another takeaway from that, folks, is don't forget that everything that goes down the Miami curbs on the side of the road goes into our lakes. So adjusting your sprinkler heads that are spraying into the street or onto your driveways where we're going to get sheet flow into the curbs, into the lakes, is another issue. So that's also something we might want to look at. And I know there's probably science on this, but just to kind of dovetail what you're saying, Steve, is, when we're in the blackout period of fertilizing in Southwest Florida, that's when the grass is growing at its most vigorous rate. So we're not fertilizing it, but it's still growing really well. Mm-hmm. So they're not taking in any of that excess nutrients. But when the blackout period is over, grass tends not to grow as much. But we're putting all this fertilizer on it, so it's not growing, not using the nutrients. And then if you're putting your sprinkler or rain comes, that runoff's going into our storm drains or into the lakes. So we're actually doing it, in my opinion, and a lot of other scientists, we're doing it backwards. We're feeding our lawns when they don't need to be because they're in almost a dormancy stage, so they're not taking up as much of that nutrients as they would if they were growing. So I think maybe getting that pilot program in, or cutting back, and I was always in favor of cutting back one of our fertilizing schedules, because phosphorus, as we know, probably there is some background in Florida, phosphorus levels that might be contributing to that as opposed to man-made. So I think there's things that we can do as a community, limiting the amount of fertilizing applications we do and adjusting sprinkler heads and things like that, but also getting with the city to maybe, and I know to treat their water maybe one stage further so it isn't as high in nutrients. So it's not just some solutions that I think as a community of environmentalists we could probably come up with.
In fact, let me add to that concept that you said. We did a study with Pond Watch because we were looking at the fertilizer blackout, and then we determined how much nutrients were before in the blackout. Then it comes the outside of the blackout, and we saw a spike of nitrogen, exactly what you're saying. They start fertilizing, the rain still coming, washes into the pond. So the blackout, artificial blackout, nature doesn't know that. But we should not be going with that blackout. Just continue the practice of reducing fertilizer, because you will see the effects on your pond.
Sometimes around the blackout period, when you can fertilize and it's about to end, sometimes you see a super high increase in fertilizer then too, because people are like, oh, we got to get this all out because we're not going to be able to fertilize for 7, 8 months, whatever it is. And so sometimes right as the fertilizer window is starting to close, you tend to see a big spike there too, because all the landscapers are like, well, we need to get it out because we're not going to be able to.
So maybe we can all make a pitch to the board that we need less fertilizer in our landscape contracts going forward. That could save us money overall. It just needs to be part of the discussion as we think through how we can best manage our whole community for the best results. So that's sort of the wrap of our presentation. I want to know if there are any questions from you guys, Casey and Kathy and Scott.
I have one. I know residents have been concerned, and I'm not quite sure if this is lake management's concern, or is it bigger. The tilapia burrowing into the sides of the lakes. What can be done? Is it being studied? Is there some sort of process we can explore?
Yeah, well, there's tilapia. It doesn't really burrow themselves, but they make this nest, which is a circle that you'll see the fish in the middle, and that's the tilapia nest that they do. The one that you might concern is the plecostomus. They call it plecos. The plecostomus, the armed catfish, and that is a serious problem. We were just talking, because it's sold as a algae eater, and they sell it for aquariums. And when they get too big, because they can get as big as this, and they don't fit the aquarium, people release them in ponds because it's a pet. They don't want to, But then that pet will grow and burrow, and they will leave their eggs in there, and then they will be reproducing. So the pond will have more of those every season. So it got to be removed, and there's only one way: physically remove the animal and sacrifice him, because it has to be removed. Otherwise, the banks are in jeopardy.
And I know, because I've been with Scott and our previous general manager on a couple of yards where they have burrowed 5-6 feet into the bank, and then the bank has collapsed. And Garrett, in his gator, as he drives around, he's already at a precarious angle, and when you drop into one of those holes, it's a problem. I mean, we know from sampling, and I know Christine has stepped in some of those, and you'll go clear up to your knee where the bank has been eroded away. So it is a real problem, Kathy, and I don't know, from a lake standpoint, we really haven't addressed it in any serious way, other than to note that it's there.
And we did early in time. We looked at and for the lack of the electrocution, low voltage shocking of the waters, but then it affects all fish. And we've talked about this before, trying to come up with a way. And again, you're talking labor intensive, money, and really what you guys have seen probably, and what you've seen and what I've seen is really the only way to cull them is to physically get in there and remove them manually. And that in itself, with all of them that we have, is a huge labor intensive. And again, it's optics also when we're out of the lake bank driving spikes into, the fish but again, we have to weigh the risk versus benefit of, the cost to recontour the bank. So if you guys ever hear of anything that seems to be working, I know you would relay that to us.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And we haven't really found anything other than, physically, out there with a hook or something, because the only way to really selectively get them out is to manually remove them almost in an individual basis, because any other method, electrofishing is the electrocution method, electrofishing, it shocks any fish within the range of the boat. So, and usually the fish float up and you take the ones out you want to get rid of. And usually the other ones, you can put them in a tank and they'll recover and you can re-release them. But there still could be potentially mortality. I know we did one study with a gill net in a very small pond in one area. But again, that's not really a selective removal process because any fish that swims into that net is going to get caught. And it's basically that fish can't be saved at that point. So we do have a fisheries department, and that is something they are working on, but we haven't really found any suitable method that, fixes all the issues you've just described about selectivity, how does it look, liability, all those things. So it's definitely a problem we're interested in coming up with solutions for, but we don't really have anything better than what's already currently out there either.
Are there any other questions from anybody? Pond watchers?
Just a comment that you told me about, Steve. If the littorals are really thick, they can't burrow, right?
Not as
look
easily,
them.
for sure.
You could look to trap them or kill them at places where there's sandy banks, and that might be a better hunting ground rather than looking all over the whole lakes.
That's true.
Yeah, and then you still want to worry about any eggs that have been laid inside a burrow as well, because if you don't get those out, they're just going to hatch and repopulate. And honestly, you probably won't be able to ever really completely eradicate them out of your ponds, but you could definitely keep the numbers down and the damage minimal.
Anything else?
Just that we've started adding the monthly to the website if the residents want to go there and take a look at the updates.
Exactly.
That'll be nice.
Yeah, and on one of the management summary pages in the back of the report that I complete, there is a treatment history page. So if you're not seeing, if you don't get the sheet from Garrett, I do reiterate the treatment history in that report as well.
So residents, I want to thank you as part of the Lakes Group. The one thing that makes my job enjoyable and even possible is the interest we have in this community in keeping our lakes as clean and healthy as they are. And I want to thank everybody for their effort to do exactly that.
Steve, could you use more volunteers?
I just paid him $11 to say that. We can always use more volunteers to be out helping us do sampling, lake sampling, and responding to questions and concerns that residents have. If you have any interest in working with the Lakes Committee on some of our projects, please send us an email on the website. I think Sandoval Lakes, if I remember right. And we will get right back to you, but we would certainly welcome any residents with an interest in seeing our lakes improve. Thank you, Scott. It's well worth $11.
Thank you all for spending the afternoon with us.
Thank you all.
Very informative.
Bye-bye.